This isn't my house. Written by Treg388. Read by No One and Nobody. Chapter 5. This isn't my home office. The man's eyes refused to open. There was nothing particularly unusual about this. After all, it was the man who was determined to keep his eyes from opening. The position he was now in was his own fault, really. The man knew that if he were to take a nap on the couch, at this point in the day, he would be inclined to remain napping, despite the fact he had work to get done. Something soft came down firmly upon the man's nose, and with a complaint, the man opened his eyes to gaze upon what caused this most recent discomfort. A small white rabbit stood on the man's chest, tapping its foot impatiently. With a roll of the eyes, the man began to rise to a sitting position, as the rabbit hopped onto the ground. Various small creatures, which had previously been napping as well, tumbled down from the man's stomach and into his lap. The man carefully moved the small animals onto the cushion next to him as he stood. The animals responded by clustering together into a small pile of sleeping bodies. The rabbit made a small cough, and, as the man turned to view what it wanted, motioned to its wrist, then to a door of the house. The man simply tilted his head in understanding and stooped down to pick up a large bag that was seated on the ground next to the couch. He had clearly napped longer than he meant to. With a small nod of thanks to the rabbit, the man turned towards the door with the intent to cross through it. He stopped, however, when he noticed something was off. It wasn't anything apparent, just a small sensation one would only recognize if they had experienced it several times before. He had no need to even approach the door to know that the room had changed. The white unicorn opened the door to her home and place of business. Her saddlebags filled just short of bursting, with the fabrics she had managed to secure at exceptionally low prices. The sound of hooves clopping across tile filled the air as the unicorn made her way around the main room, depositing each fabric in the location set aside specifically for it. With her first task completed, the mare calmly trotted to the back of her boutique, stopping only once in front of a mirror to ensure the purple curls of her mane were neither too tight nor the slightest bit out of their place. Conducting herself with poise and grace, as she strives to do in all things, the pony opened the door to the room where a majority of her work takes place, only to let out a blood-curdling scream at the sight before her. The man stared into the latest room. It was odd, to say the least. The rooms thus far had always been swapped with their matching counterparts, so the man could only assume this was someone's home office. But whatever they did for a living was near impossible to decipher from what he could see in the room. The large amount of fabric and dresses at first made him assume they were some sort of fashion designer. Then there were the weird statues, like the horses you'd find on a merry-go-round, only bleached completely white and without the pole coming from the top. Perhaps the person who previously owned this room designed the parts for merry-go-rounds. Or perhaps they were into some weird kind of horse dresses. Either way, the man couldn't afford to let himself get distracted by such thoughts. For this time, he had a plan, and it required action. The man cleared off a spot on an unusually short table and set down his bag to begin work. At this point in time, it is worth mentioning that the bag carried by the man is in fact a very important part of his day-to-day life. After so many incidents where the man lost rooms, and the items in them, he decided he needed a safety net should something important be lost, or if he were inside of a room when it went to wherever the rooms go. So, naturally, the man decided to carry a bag with him at all times, and even to sleep with it beside him. Inside of this bag, the man had a copy of every important document: passports, leases, tax information, and the like. A single gold brick worth $237 American, a change of clothes, a laptop, 2 water bottles, a book titled Ways to Survive in 5 Hostile Environments, 7 small booklets of handy translations between English and Mandarin, Hindustani, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic, 2 emergency credit cards wrapped in $100 in cash, and 1 X-26C taser, just in case. The man felt adequately prepared for anything the universe could throw at him, aside from having a right arm that, after weeks of carrying the heavy bag, had become substantially stronger than his left arm. The unicorn stared numbly through the doorway that should have led to the most important room of her home. It wasn't just the room where she did her most important work. It was the room where she could get away from everything and concentrate only on what she loved, dressmaking. It was the room where she could decide what was beauty and what was not. It was her most important sanctuary. But now, it was just some kind of sick joke. The dull brown work desk sitting in the middle of the floor, the oversized chair sitting behind the desk, the bookcases full of musty tomes lining the right and left walls, the large, strange black box with lights and wires covering it, sitting back against the wall, the dingy brown carpeting that was so bland a dirt floor would have been preferable. It was all just so horrid. The unicorn fell back upon a Victorian fainting couch that seemed to conveniently appear where it was needed. The man sat on a small wooden stool, waiting for his laptop to boot up. The man was not a fan of slow machinery. The white unicorn, after several utterances of "Woe is me," and a small amount of wallowing, righted herself back upon the floor and took a deep breath. Sure, this is probably the worst thing to ever happen to her, but there had to be a bright side to it. She had just gotten plenty of fabrics for a very low price, so she had the materials to spend hours remaking everything she lost. Her little sister couldn't have possibly done this, so she didn't have to spend energy yelling at her. Positives. Yes, look at the positives. Perhaps some of these strange objects were worth something to some pony. Maybe she could sell them to help make back the profits she was sure to lose because of this setback in her work. The positives were getting harder and harder to spot. At this rate, the unicorn— "What kind of material is that?" The mare had rushed to the oversized chair and was intensely scrutinizing the strange fabric it was made out of. It was so impossibly smooth, and on close examination, no threads could be seen. It was firm and held its shape, yet gave way easily to weight. It was magnificent. She would give just about anything to work with that material. The man fidgeted on the wooden stool he had brought into the room. It was small and uncomfortable, but at least it was a seat. He leaned over his laptop and typed in the web address he had set up beforehand. His entire plan revolved around the small fact that when his bathroom was originally swapped, the new one still had running water. Hopefully, all the rooms kept their utilities. Not that it would make any sense, but when one's rooms are randomly being replaced, there is no such thing as a solid bet. After several seconds of staring at a blank screen, and wishing he had the foresight to remove his leather office chair from the room before it had vanished, it was infinitely more comfortable than any other seat, the man noticed something odd about the screen. The load bar was full. He quickly came to the conclusion that the page he was trying to reach had in fact loaded, but was simply blank. That was not supposed to be. Naturally, there was only one method for dealing with an issue such as this. The man began repeatedly pressing the F5 key. The unicorn sat comfortably in the oversized chair, enjoying the feel of the material on her body. White hooves carefully squeezed the chair arms. It gave her a feeling that she could barely identify. It was a feeling of power. Yes, that's the right word. The kind of power where others would listen to whatever you say. Power over all things within your sight. She was in charge, and no pony would. The unicorn slipped out of the chair and onto her snout. With a groan, the mare with the alabaster-like coat rose back to her hooves. Deciding that power trips were too painful to take, she telekinetically pushed the chair away from herself. The movement of the chair brought the unicorn's attention to a small red light that was previously blocked from her view. Carefully, she moved towards the light to discover it was actually a circle sitting below a small lens of glass and outlining a single word. Power. Perhaps one more trip wouldn't be too much for the day. The unicorn pressed a hoof to the word. Almost immediately, the black rectangle came to life with a great rumbling as the light changed from red to green. The whirs and groans of the beast causing the unicorn to back away in fear before turning to dive under the desk, her hindquarters sticking out from the cover. Clearly she had angered something that she should not have. The man held his head in his hands. It was simply not working, and that was beginning to frustrate him. With a groan of contempt, the man raised his head to push the button one final time. This produced a single dialog box. Username and password? The man grinned broadly. It was working! Quickly, he typed password into the username box and admin into the password box. When he came up with that, it felt so clever it hurt. In response, the screen produced two options: View Feed and Log Out. The man clicked on View Feed and leaned in closer to the screen. The screen produced a single image for the man to view. It was... a horse's rear? The man blinked dumbly at what he was seeing. Why would the camera be viewing a horse's rear? The gears in the man's head began to turn. Unless someone was doing this to him and they discovered his plan. This was them mocking him. They were calling him well, he'd show them. Angrily, the man slammed his laptop shut, just as the horse was beginning to turn around. The man could not take this insult quietly. He would come up with some method to discover how this was being done to him, and he would make the one responsible pay. The man stormed out of the room to begin plotting. The unicorn slowly backed out of her hiding place and turned to face the beast that had become so quiet. The rectangular monstrosity was simply sitting there, doing little aside from looking hideous. The mare approached the rectangle once more and swiftly tapped the word she had touched before, watching as the green light went back to red. Pleased that she had fixed whatever it was she had done, the mare trotted around the desk to leave the room. Perhaps it was best she not disturb anything else in the room until she could get some pony with a good deal of knowledge to help handle it. Shortly after the unicorn vacated the room, a light blue aura surrounded the chair and dragged it out of the room, then shut the door. No point in leaving good furniture behind.